Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Chanel Blackwood, and I'm the marketing manager at IREE. Welcome and thank you for registering for today's session, Publishing Pedagogical Research on Innovations in Economics Teaching. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes and will be recorded and uploaded on the IREE website afterwards. Before we begin today's session, I just wanted to run through a couple housekeeping items. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties throughout the duration of our webinar, please feel free to text your questions into the chat box. Everyone on the line has currently been muted except for our speakers today. Any questions for our speakers will be held until the end of the session when we'll open for facilitated Q&A portion. I'd now like to hand things over to Heather. Heather, over to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar today. We have Professor David McCausland, who is based at the University of Aberdeen, and David has a wealth of experience in teaching, and he's received 3 different teaching awards, and he's currently Director of Education at the University of Aberdeen Business School since 2020. And he is also the editor-in-chief of the International Review of Economics Education. So thank you, David, for agreeing to speak today, and now I'll pass over to you.
Okay, many thanks, Heather, and it's a real pleasure to speak to colleagues in IREE. So I'm going to talk today for roughly around 40 or 45 minutes. To give chance for some questions at the end. So in terms of the talk today, this is the structure of the talk. I'm going to talk just very briefly a little bit about myself and where I'm from, and also about the IREE journal. And then I'm going to say a little bit about what we look for in terms of articles submitted to the journal. Give some tips for getting published, talk about topics of interest to the journal, and then finally at the end, talk about some potential other publications avenues for pedagogic research, and finally at the end, why you might actually want to engage in this kind of pedagogical research. So that's the menu for this afternoon, or probably this morning in some parts of the audience. So a little bit about me. I'm a professor of economics, and at the moment I am Director of Education at the University of Aberdeen Business School. I'm also a member of the Chartered Association of Business Schools Learning, Teaching and Student Experience Committee, and an associate of the Economics Network, which is a network in the UK that's aimed at enhancing the teaching of economics in the UK and more broadly. And as Heather said, currently editor-in-chief of the International Review of Economics Education at IREE, and also at the moment I'm part of the advisory group for the economics subject benchmark statement review, which is a statement that we use in the UK to give guidance for the design of economics curricula. I wanted just to highlight where I'm actually from, Aberdeen in Scotland. So it's not always a place that people are familiar with. So I thought I'd just show you a map to show you where we're located, about 2.5 hours north of Edinburgh in Scotland. And we are one of a very small number of what we called ancient universities. You'll have seen from the logo there that we are now a quarter of a way through our 6th century. And the university is founded on this very, I think, quite motivating statement that we're open to all and dedicated to the pursuit of truth and the service of others, which I find, although it's over 500 years old, it's a remarkably prescient statement for today's inclusive, interdisciplinary, international and sustainable themes that we adhere to. So if you're interested in Aberdeen and its history, there's lots to look at. So in terms of the journal, we're an Elsevier journal, and our focus is to enhance the learning and teaching in the higher education economics community. And we aim within the journal to provide a forum for high quality research in the areas of curriculum design, pedagogy, assessment, and teaching and learning innovation. And what we hope to do is to promote critical dialogue on educational theory and practice in economics, and demonstrate the relevance of research and scholarship to good professional practice. So they're the aims and scope of the journal. The journal originally came out of and still has a very close relationship with the Economics Network. We're now over 20 years old, and it's, as it says there, it's one of the largest and longest established academic organizations devoted to improving the teaching and learning of economics in universities. And if you're not already familiar with the Economics Network, it has a wealth of resources available to people who teach in economics, but also all of the subject areas around economics. So health economics is one of those areas. And there's a whole wealth of resources. So if you are asked, for example, to teach a course at very short notice, and you're maybe not familiar with that area, then there's a lot of resources there. There's lecture notes, case studies, things that might give you some inspiration. So if you're not familiar with it, I'd urge you to go and have a look at the website and have a look what's there. The network also has a conference every 2 years, which is the D conference, and I'll say a little bit more about that later, which is a really good platform if you're doing pedagogic research to launch your research and to get feedback from like-minded people. So that's an international conference held in the UK every 2 years in September. So the next one in September 2023. So more about the journal. So we have a relatively small pool of editors. There's 4 of us, myself, and then we have 2 editors in the US and another editor in the UK. We'd like to diversify this a little bit to get a greater reach internationally, and that's part of our plan. But they're the current editors at the moment. And I wanted to give you a few statistics. I think it's important to have the sort of context that publication in this field sits within. So these are the submission rates and the editorial outcomes within our particular journal. So you can see from this that we reject approximately 3/4 of articles, and this is really sort of we have a desk reject, which is a first pass, and then articles that get beyond that desk reject state then are sent out to reviewers. And we're trying to improve the quality of the journal over the past few years, so that reject rate has increased a little bit, but it's still a better publications chance than you would get in normal field journals, which usually have a much higher rejection rate. So that's just a little bit of context for you. In terms of region, as you can see from the graphs there, we have a lot of submissions from the US and from Europe. Europe there includes the UK in that data, and an increasing number of submissions coming from Asia. Less well represented from Africa and South America, but we are starting to receive interesting articles from those regions as well. So a truly international journal. And in terms of publication speed, one thing I think we're all blighted with it in economics is very long lags between submission and publication. 1 or 2 years in standard economics submissions. In terms of the publication speed in this journal, you can see we've been trying hard to improve our publication speed, and you can see that reflected in the graph there, and the type of publications lag that you might want to expect if you were submitting to the journal. And I think that's fairly typical in this sort of scholarship field. And a little bit more data in terms of the date from submission right through to final publication. So we're talking almost a year in terms of distance between first submission and actual publication. In terms of impact factor, I've put here just some statistics that show the improvement impact factor, and just as a comparison to one of our leading competitors, and there are others, just to give you an idea of that. And now to look at maybe the type of articles that we'd be accepting. So looking at some of the most cited articles in the last full year. So you can see here that we, over the past few years, we've published in things like the flipped classroom. We did have a special issue on financial literacy some time ago, which has generated some interest, and so some of those papers still have a continued presence in citations. We also publish, if you like, more survey-oriented articles. So the Economics Instructors Toolbox there was our prize-winning paper. It was one of the author got the prize for best article. So we publish a small number of articles that bring together, if you like, the state of the art in a particular area, and this is a really popular paper that brings together the literature in a nice form. More recently, there's starting to emerge research on how teaching and learning have adapted during the pandemic, how to teach to millennials, more on the flipped classroom, and use of social media. So these are some of the emerging trends or popular trends. And in terms of most downloaded articles, you can see a similar type of picture. So COVID, obviously, of importance, financial literacy papers, looking at the happiness and well-being of students, quite a number of papers looking at gender, performance of students in terms of attainment gap and so forth. So that gives you just a little bit of flavour on some of the popular articles that have been published in the journal. And we also get data from Elsevier about articles that get social media attention. So that might be important in in KPIs in your institutions. And so these are, again, some of a similar theme coming through in terms of the type of articles that are of interest. So to move on to the next bit, what is IREE actually looking for? So like many other journals in this field, we're looking for articles that look at how economics students learn, what economics should be taught, what are the challenges and solutions for improving teaching and learning economics, how we can improve current practice, what we can learn internationally. So, tie it in with agendas like decolonizing the curriculum. What other international perspectives can we draw upon? Brought into sharp focus during the pandemic, how can we make better use of e-learning technologies? And then we also have a very small number of selected book reviews, normally by invitation, but we'd also be happy to receive unsolicited submissions in that area too. So these are some of the key things that we're looking for in the journal. In terms of getting published, we're often asked for tips that would help authors get published. So what we're looking for is articles that connect with the literature and establish what the contribution is. So this is no different from publishing a normal economics field paper where you would sit your contribution within a wider literature. And just because this is a pedagogical piece of research, it doesn't mean to say that has to be forgotten. It's really important to embed your contribution within the educational literature. Also, it's really important to have some evidence base. So there needs to be some, I say, decent statistical analysis performed, or alternatively, some decent evaluation of student satisfaction, or improvements in grades, or outcomes of surveys and questionnaires. There's got to be some kind of evaluation of what's been done, what impact has it had. It's also important to demonstrate wide appeal. So things that affect first year or undergraduate tend to have a wider appeal than postgraduate. The type of articles we publish are about economics education, not education economics, and that's really important. We do get articles about educational theory, but they're not related to teaching and learning in economics, and clearly they're out of scope. So it's about economics education. So what students learn in economics, how they learn, how learning can be improved, and how their learning of economics should be assessed, so how we assess our students. So these are the key things. So sitting the contribution within the literature and demonstrating what the impact is. It's really important to have those two components in there. So in terms of the empirics, just as we would in normal research, make sure that the empirics are sound. Pay attention to sample size. If there's a control group, state any limitations, use the right econometric tests, and don't overclaim. So these are all the kind of things we teach our students as well, but it's really important that these kind of principles are adhered to, and really important to proofread and write clearly and coherently and concisely. So these are important tips. Topics of interest. So this is not an exclusive list. We've seen a flavour of what has been published. So the topics of interest that we're looking for at the moment are, particularly in the context of what we've learned through the pandemic, are innovative assessment and feedback, how we might use technology to enhance the learning experience, innovative use of media, so different ways of teaching, different media, employing innovative software to enhance teaching, so how to enhance the teaching of quantitative subjects, use of simulations, use of experimental economics, gamification of learning, and how we evaluate student learning outcomes. So these are topics that we are particularly interested in at the current moment. The types of research article that we'd be looking for are teaching innovations. These might not be novel. Sorry, these might not be radical, but they do need to be novel. They need to have some interest to the reader, but they do need to be evaluated. It's not just telling us about it, but telling us how effective it has been by some measure of student performance or satisfaction. So teaching innovations is the first thing, and we often do things that are novel, but as academics we don't shout about them, and this is giving an opportunity to demonstrate what you've done and how important it's been. Literature reviews, as we've seen, our prize-winning paper was a paper that brought together the literature, so drawing together evidence from a range of previous studies. That can be useful as well. Curriculum development forms the core of many articles. So things like what should go into curricula, what should be left out in terms of content and skills. But again, we require some evidence on how effective that has been on student learning or student satisfaction. And then articles that look at innovative assessment. So in terms of tips for success, think about relevance. Is the paper relevant to a wide readership and a broad constituency? How relevant is it going to be internationally? How relevant is it to a wide range of potential readers? Think about the impact and applications. So are the findings capable of being applied easily to different situations, making a real difference to the teaching and learning experience of other students or other colleagues? And clarity and concision. We're looking for papers that are well written, plain English, concise, well structured. These are key things when you're reflecting on a paper prior to submission that are important. And I'm rattling on much quicker than I expected, but I wanted to say a few things about other publications avenues. So although I've focused a lot around IREE and what we're looking for, the things I've discussed there are common to lots of similar journals, but there are other publications avenues that may suit your area of research better. So for example, the economics network has lots of resources, and those resources are provided by you. They're provided by the economics community. So they have a handbook for economics lecturers, which are slightly longer pieces that give guidance on a whole range of areas. And what you may find in your research, that what you're writing might fit better with a chapter in a handbook rather than a research article. So there are opportunities there. The Ideas Bank, the iNomics blog is another site that targets a different constituency, perhaps a younger constituency, but gets a different message out. So that's another site you might want to have a look at. And in terms of conferences, so I've talked a little bit about already the economics network and its developments in economics education, or D-conference. So that's every 2 years. And this is a very friendly and positive environment where many papers are given their first presentation before being worked up into journal articles. So if you're working in that area, it's a really collegiate environment for presenting your research. Likewise, the Chartered Association of Business Schools, we tend to think of this more as a management fora, but there are lots of similar articles here that relate to the teaching of economics and finance as well. And again, this is a fantastically collegiate and positive, a much bigger conference. This is in Belfast later this month. That's an annual conference, so in Belfast in Northern Ireland later this month. And then you may find that some of your national organisations that are responsible for quality control also have conferences. So particularly in Scotland, we have the QAA, the Quality Assurance Agency for Scotland, have what they call an enhancement theme. So every few years there's a new enhancement theme, and there are conferences to support that. And again, it's a very positive environment for presenting research in lots of different ways, either as research articles or as posters or social media outputs. So different, if you're not at the stage of publishing in a journal like IREE, there are other publications outputs that you might want to engage with. And in terms of, I guess many of us working in this field might be on teaching and scholarship type contracts. So how to develop your skills in these areas. So just to mention a few here that you might be interested in. So HEA accreditation is one thing that's really important in the UK. The Chartered Association of Business Schools Certified Management and Business Educator designation gives you the opportunity to engage in CPD in this area. Likewise, the Chartered Association events and networks and conferences are useful opportunities. And as I said, economics network and training and events and all of the material they have on their website is another avenue that you might want to look into. And then finally, you might say, well, why publish in these kind of journals? And I suppose that the motivation, as I've just indicated, is that many colleagues are what we call in the UK on sort of teaching and scholarship contracts rather than teaching and research contracts. And those of you who are familiar with AACSB accreditation will probably be familiar with this little grid. So whereas most staff are probably scholarly academics, many staff who are on teaching and scholarship contracts are what we might call practice academics. And the way that we evaluate, I guess, performance of practice academics is different from how we would evaluate the performance of research staff in terms of article publication. And in our university, we have the criteria that you see on the left-hand side here. So you can see there that some of the criteria for performance are things like published textbooks, publishing an accepted article in an applied or pedagogical research journal. So particularly younger staff who are on these type of contracts, this gives them some way of engaging with the pedagogic literature and some way of meeting their particular objectives. So there's a sort of contractual motivation as well as a motivation for intrinsic interest. So I've got through what I wanted to say a little bit quicker than I imagined, but that gives some time for questions. I'm going to stop sharing. Obviously, I haven't seen any questions in the chat just yet, but I'll hand back to Heather.
Thanks, David. That was a really interesting presentation. I guess, does anyone, I see one thing has come up in the chat. I'll leave you to, and then I see there's a question in the chat and a hand up. So should we go to the chat first because that to me came up, and then we'll go to the hand.
Yes, so your institution will have an ethics policy which you'd need to follow. Normally, it's by student evaluations, we're usually meaning statistical data on, for example, student satisfaction scores or student performance. So you wouldn't be revealing individual details of individual students. It would be aggregate data rather than specific data about a student. But clearly, if you are using questionnaire surveys, that may fall within your institution's own ethics policy for research, and you'd need to follow that.
Hopefully, Paula, that answers your question, but please feel free to follow up if anything isn't clear. Astrid, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, David, as well. So I'm calling from South Africa. So I think one of your least represented continents or regions there. I wanted to find out of what is the place of qualitative research for the journal. And in the context that I'm doing a discrete choice experiment regarding health economics, management and research in a curriculum. And the first phase was quite rigorous in terms of the qualitative research. And then the other one, the discrete choice experiment. Is there a place for qualitative research findings regarding health economics for curriculum design in the paper? Or would the focus more be on the discrete choice experiment to inform curriculum design? I'm not sure if that's clear.
I think the focus for this journal would be more on the discrete choice experiment, but that's not to say that good qualitative research is not welcome either. And I think it would strengthen the article if there was both of if you would report both.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you so much.
There's another comment in the chat from Linda.
Many thanks, Linda. I can see you're from GCU as well. Hope you're enjoying Glasgow. Hope it's not raining. I'm glad you found it useful. I think it's important, particularly for people early in their careers, and you say you're in week 5 of a new post, to have that, to have this kind of steer in terms of what they might want to research in terms of pedagogical developments. What we're really looking for is if you've made an innovation in your course or an intervention in your course, can you tell us about that intervention? Can you tell us about your innovation and show what effect that's had on your students? So that might be in terms of introducing something new into the curriculum. So we've talked already about things like flipping the classroom. Many of us during the pandemic have done things that are rather like flipping the classroom, giving students things to work with before the face-to-face interaction with staff, so that you use that face-to-face time better. We've talked a little bit about different assessment methods. So I think for all of us over the last 2 years, we've maybe tried things that we would not have tried before by virtue of necessity, but it's forced us out of our comfort zone. We've maybe tried different things. Now is an opportunity to reflect on those things we've done differently and how we've assessed differently. But now we get into the stage where we're, I hate to say this, but kind of reaching an equilibrium in a sense. It's time that we could evaluate that. What's been the experience of students? How has this impacted on student satisfaction? How has it impacted on grades? How has it impacted on award gaps between different groups of students? Has the change in assessment methods benefited people with learning differences? Has it benefited students who come from different ethnic backgrounds? Is there somewhere we could evaluate what we've done so that we can take the best lessons from our recent experiences in the pandemic, reflecting on different ways of teaching? So you'll be familiar in Glasgow with in economics teaching of the core methodology, so flipping teaching on its head and not just teaching theory and then application, but actually motivating teaching from the issue and saying, well, what tools can economics bring to bear on a particular issue? So these kind of narratives, but there's so many more, and we'd be interested to hear what you're doing at GCU and so what innovations you might be thinking of doing.
David, can you hear me?
I can, perfect.
David, I put a piece in the chat so that I didn't get tongue-tied on what we're doing. An awful lot of the teaching innovations are basically done at one place, and so they end up having a strong scent of case study. So we can say, well, this is how it works at my university and such. And you're probably aware that shameless plug that we put together a handbook on best practices. But what's very difficult in this situation is collecting even a sample of 5 institutions, let alone 30 that student would want for some kind of good t-tests or something like that. Do you have any thoughts about this at all?
It depends what you mean, what your sample is. If we're talking about an innovation within a class, if your classes are small, it may be that you want to collaborate with people from other institutions teaching similar things to see whether the results that you've determined in your institution are more widely applicable and they're not just a facet of that particular institution. And there are a number of papers and indeed conference papers I've seen where people have done that. There are people who work together and they compare results across institutions. What would not be looked at favorably is if there were just 1 or 2 selected comments from students in a particular course that it wasn't a representative view that could be verified.
Okay, thank you.
A lot of the problem we have is that people submit articles and there's no evaluation at all, and I don't think in any journal you'd get very far by just submitting lecture notes, and we do get articles submitted where it is somebody's lecture notes and they're very proud of them and they're they've tweaked a model, but that's not really what we're looking for. It's something that enhances the way we teach and can be demonstrated to have some positive effect or a negative effect, if that's it demonstrate the effect.
Excellent, thank you. Does anyone have any other further questions before I ask my own question? Okay, so I'm just going to ask a question based upon some of the things that we're doing at the moment in the Teaching Health Economic FIG. So there's a big push that's being led by Di and colleagues on kind of sort of decolonizing the curriculum, so increasing capacity building in lower middle income countries for teaching health economics. So as you're aware, kind of a lot of material comes from the US and the UK and trying to help create country-specific material. So thinking along those lines, would that be something kind of that would be publishable in one of these journals, and thinking about kind of how you do it, that evaluating some of the outcomes and experiences of the students?
Absolutely. I think it's not just the journal, but I think like the economics network as well, for example, would be interested in specific ways that you can implement, for example, decolonizing the curriculum in your specific field. I think lots of institutions are discussing that issue generally at a high level. The challenge comes, how do you implement that in a department of economics or in I'm sure in health economics too. And I think that kind of resource to get inspiration of how it can be implemented, providing it's applicable and it's not too specific to an institution, and providing there's some evaluation, then I think that would be of considerable interest to us, but I think more widely.
Excellent, that's great to know. Okay, does anyone else have any further questions or comments? Dahlia?
Yeah, I just wanted to raise the issue of how you're defining economics, which is very big to those of us who do health economics. So in the past, although not recently, I've taught course for Masters of Public Administration students, and prior to that, Masters of Public Health students, that contains a lot of health economics, but very applied, very low tech, and also a lot of institutional things about, payment systems, empirical evidence about the selection and insurance markets. And again, our course is no longer even labeled health economics. It has other things, and it's very much not standard economics, but this is an enormous issue, obviously, for those of us in health economics.
I think in terms of the journal, it would need to be signposted as being economics. But that doesn't mean to say, so for example, many colleagues are teaching economics to different audiences. They're not teaching in fact, I would say in the UK, most academics teaching economics are not teaching economics to BSc or MA economics students. They're teaching economics to students doing management or business or finance, and some of that teaching is challenging. You're teaching to a very different audience of people who are maybe not as motivated as your standard undergraduate economist. So dealing with the challenges of teaching economics to a diverse audience, I think is something that is of real interest to readers. So providing it has that applicability, how you teach these concepts to different audiences, that's kind of maybe the angle that I'd come from, so that it's signposted to economics. Does that make sense? It's maybe not the answer you wanted, but
yeah, no, it does make sense. It's I'm known for my bluntness. I think the efforts that people make in health economics sometimes to put our work into a standard microeconomic framework is detrimental to students and broader communities understanding. So I get it may not be the best fit. That was why I asked the question.
I think we have another hand up as well. Is it Arturo?
Yep. I'm sorry about my English, but I haven't used it for a couple of weeks. Let me ask you about I direct a master course, and we have some issues which it was said by Dalia that are bordered to the core of health economics. For example, we have at least many theses of students related with cost of transplant of kidneys, and we have many theses on the cost of road safety. And we are worried about how to translate our approach of health economics, about the framework health economics, and about the tools for these people who are public servants or people in the private sector to really develop these approaches and improve the health economics performance of both sectors. And that is related also with the widespread of the use of internets, webinar, and so which will be your comments about publishing articles related with these specific issues, and which will be the value added to spread these approaches into these two communities. Thank you.
So I guess this fits under the theme of employability of graduates. So it's what skills we are equipping our graduates with, what competencies are we providing our graduates with to go out into their workplaces. So in terms of publishing in that area, it would be, what is your approach to teaching those skills or competencies, and how successful have you been in terms of meeting those objectives? I think that would be that's where I see it would, it would fit. And these are the big themes at the moment, aren't they? We've talked about EDI related things, so decolonizing the curriculum is one example. Employability is another big area which you've just touched on. Inclusiveness, internationalization of the curriculum. These are the kind of big overarching themes, and I think if your work resonates with those, that gives a motivation and a starting point.
Great, thank you. And oh, Di.
Di, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Mute. I am on mute, sorry. Not really a question, but more a comment. I mean, I think that, the Teaching Health Economics SIG, we've been really trying to get some papers around teaching health economics into the IREE Congress, and very often they're not really accepted. And that was one of the reasons why we wanted to have this this webinar today, to just get some inspiration around research that is more likely to get onto the agenda. We want it on the main Congress agenda and inspire people. And for me, one of the key things that you said in your presentation is that it needs to have an evaluation component. There needs to be some impact assessment. And for me, that's one of the big takeaway messages. And it's part of what we've been trying to do. And I just wonder if, and I think sometimes, it's quite difficult to think through, so we're trying to support colleagues around the world in developing curricula for health economics, new health economics programs, but curricula that is relevant to their context and that sort of thing. And somebody says you should research the process, and then you think, how do you get that kind of impact and evaluation component into it? So I actually wonder whether we shouldn't organize a couple of webinars where people present, and obviously it might not be on health economics, but more broadly on economics, that sparks some ideas of the kind of research that one could do about e-learning or about flipped classrooms or around the curriculum development. So my sense is that we might come back to you and ask you to recommend some of the top researchers or papers that have been published, so that we can, actually demonstrate to colleagues how we can get that kind of evaluation and analytic component, rather than having more descriptive research being presented around teaching. But thank you very much for a really interesting presentation. I think it's been very thought-provoking.
I think this. Thank you for your comments. I think this also ties in with how you would structure a teaching intervention, and you were looking for funds to support that. So, in my institution, we have internal funds that go to support teaching enhancement projects, but also QAA Scotland and other bodies support research into enhancing teaching and learning. And always when you're putting together a project proposal, a really integral part of the project proposal is how you evaluate the outcomes. And this is no different to that. But I would think, one thing to look at, Di, would be the economics network, because they also have these other kind of resources. So it's kind of a, when you're looking at curriculum development, there's a whole matrix of things. So there's research articles, but there's also handbook chapters, case studies, question banks, all of these kind of other things. And it seems to me that teaching health economics would fit. And I could nearly stake my life on there is a health economics piece to the economics network. So it might be worthwhile just having a look at that and maybe contributing to it.
Heather, I didn't know if you wanted to comment, but Heather was actually very involved in the economics network, the health economics component of compiling some of that material. And we've tried, we've established a repository of teaching materials on the IREE website now, where we've had permission to draw on some of that, but we're trying to expand it so that it's very international then in terms of the types of materials. But you're right that the repository, those kind of repositories are incredibly helpful. But we're having a virtual workshop in about 2 or 3 weeks' time, where we're going to be looking at issues. This is all part of the supporting colleagues in developing new courses. And one of the things that is likely to come up in that webinar on developing course outlines and reading lists is yes, absolutely have a look at what other people are doing, and that's a great starting point. But also think seriously about your own context and what's relevant within that. But I see time's nearly up, so I'm not going to advertise future workshops anymore.
It's very interesting, and your dog seems to be enthusiastic too.
Excellent. Well, I'm conscious now it's 1 minute till 3 p.m. or whatever time to the hour. So I just want to thank you, David, for taking the time to speak to us. It was a fantastic presentation and hopefully gave everyone lots to think about. Yes, thank you.
Okay, many thanks. It's been a pleasure.
Take care, Heather.
Bye.
Take care, Ty.
You too. Cheers. Thanks very much, David.
Thank you, David.